The night he slammed the door behind me, yelling loud enough for the neighbors to hear, I stood on the front porch barefoot, clutching a duffel bag and silence, and knew right then that I would never forget the sound of being discarded. "You're dead weight," he shouted, like he hadn't just lived off my income for 3 years straight. "You think I'm gonna carry you now?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have words, but because I had already made a decision not to waste them on someone who only listened when there was money attached. I walked away with my head high, not because I felt strong, but because I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me fold. What he didn't know, what he'd never bothered to learn, was that the job I'd just lost was a contract I had already planned to exit, and the severance? It was 6 figures, plus equity, plus residuals. What he didn't know was that while he spent years mocking my startup consulting gigs, I'd been quietly building something he could never comprehend. I had assets tucked into shell companies, equity in 3 fintech platforms, and a silent partner seat on a SaaS acquisition about to go public. I wasn't broke. I was strategic, but none of that mattered in the moment. Because when someone you've fed, housed, supported, and loved tells you to get out like you're worthless, it doesn't sting less just because you know better. I called a rideshare, got in, and didn't even flinch when the driver asked if I was okay. "Just a shift," I said. "I'll be better tomorrow." And I meant it. The next morning, I checked into a boutique hotel downtown using one of the many business cards tied to my LLC. I brewed coffee, opened my laptop, and scheduled 3 meetings. One with a wealth strategist, one with my legal team, and one with a design firm I'd been eyeing to brand my next venture. By noon, I was working, not wallowing. By 2, I had closed a consulting deal with a mid-size app company pivoting into healthcare. 5 figures up front. No apology needed. That night, I ordered dinner to my suite, sipped wine from the minibar, and thought about how he used to brag about being the while I paid 70% of the bills. I let the thought pass. Because men like that always tell on themselves eventually. He didn't kick me out for losing my job. He kicked me out because he lost control. The next day, I updated the beneficiaries on my insurance policies. I rewrote my estate plan. I donated to a women's shelter in his mother's name. Then I booked a weekend trip to Miami. Not to escape, but to plan. Because while he thought I was crumbling, I was recalibrating. He thought he'd humiliated me, but what he really did was set me free. And soon, when my new venture launched, and my face showed up on the founder profiles in every tech journal he still pretended to read, he'd understand exactly who he threw out. Not a failure, a fortune. Wrapped in silence, ready to rise. The first morning in Miami felt like a different kind of exhale. Sunlight spilling through hotel curtains, my phone already buzzing with investor inquiries, and me sitting cross-legged on the balcony in a white robe, finalizing a pitch deck that would leave every doubter breathless. I wasn't on vacation. I was staging a takeover. My ex thought he'd watched me fall apart, but what he didn't realize was that being kicked out of that apartment was the last push I needed to stop playing small. While he was posting thirst traps and passive-aggressive quotes on Instagram, I was closing a partnership deal with a rising payment tech startup that had quietly gone viral on college campuses. I dialed into a call with their CEO, outlined a monetization strategy, and landed an advisory share stake within 20 minutes. "You move fast," she said. "I move smart," I replied. After the call, I walked into the hotel business center, printed out the latest asset sheet from my portfolio manager, and stared at the numbers. 7 figures in liquidity, holdings diversified across 7 markets, passive income from 3 automated revenue streams, and not a single cent of it was ever tied to him. That afternoon, I met with a personal branding consultant. "You need to be visible now," she said. "Everything about you screams stealth genius. It's time they see you." I nodded, not out of ego, but out of readiness. I'd spent years letting him stand in the spotlight while I built the infrastructure. Now, I was the infrastructure, the platform, the power source. I approved a photo shoot, began drafting a Forbes column, and scheduled an interview with a business podcast that had just landed a Spotify deal. That night, I ate dinner alone at a rooftop restaurant, not lonely, but sovereign. I looked down at the city lights and realized I didn't miss him. I didn't miss the gaslighting, the guilt, the slow erosion of worth hidden behind smiles and backhanded compliments. What I missed was me. before I let someone make me feel like ambition was arrogance, before I let someone shrink my shine just because they couldn't match it. On day 3, I flew back to New York and signed the lease on a penthouse unit downtown, fully paid up front through my holding company. The keys felt heavier than they should have. Maybe because they weren't just for a new home, they were for a new life. That evening, I sent a single text to him. You were right. I didn't need you. No context, no follow-up. He didn't reply, but I saw the read receipt. The next morning, his name popped up under People You May Know on LinkedIn. No job listed, no updates, just a frozen photo of a man still pretending he was the one who had it all figured out. I closed the tab and smiled, because now, he wasn't even a chapter. He was a footnote. And I had just begun the part of the story where the empire gets built, with his absence as the foundation. 2 weeks after I moved into the penthouse, I received an invitation to speak on a panel titled Founders Who Defied the Odds. And as I scrolled through the other names, venture capitalists, tech innovators, and 2 people I'd once cold emailed for mentorship, I realized I no longer needed anyone's permission to take up space. I replied yes, sent over my bio, and scheduled a branding shoot in the new apartment, every detail designed not to flaunt but to affirm. Glass walls, open light, shelves lined with startup manuals, and art I bought for myself without asking anyone's opinion. I hadn't just survived, I had ascended, and the view looked even better from here. That weekend, I sat across from my wealth advisor and listened as he walked through the updated projections. You've doubled in 18 months, he said. Technically, you're past what we even classify as early stage high net worth. I sipped my coffee, unfazed. Let's keep going, because that's what people like him never understood. My success wasn't sudden, it was suppressed, buried under years of being told to tone it down, be grateful, don't outshine. I had unlearned all of it, and now nothing about me was small. Meanwhile, he started showing up in the periphery. My ex. A tagged post here, a mutual friend mentioning his name. One even messaged me. He's still telling people you left because you couldn't handle pressure. I didn't reply. I didn't correct the record. I let him keep telling stories while I wrote facts. That week, I launched my own fund. Small, focused, and mine. Built to invest in overlooked founders, especially women who had been silenced in rooms that never deserved them. The announcement hit tech media like a quiet storm. No press release, just results. Within 48 hours, I received over 100 pitch decks. Within 72, I had a call with a fintech founder whose product had more traction than anything in my ex's portfolio ever did. I built this in secret, she said. I smiled, so did I. Later that night, I walked through my apartment barefoot, the city lights bouncing off glass, and opened the drawer where I'd tucked the old eviction notice from the night he kicked me out. I unfolded it once, then shredded it. Not out of rage, out of peace. Because I wasn't proving anything anymore. I wasn't rising to spite him. I was rising because I had stopped waiting for someone to choose me and started choosing myself. And the fortune I'd been hiding, it wasn't just money. It was clarity, capacity, power. It was the refusal to beg for what I was already building in silence. He thought throwing me out would destroy me. What he didn't realize was, he cleared the path, and I never looked back. The day my Forbes profile went live, I was on the 38th floor of a midtown tower finalizing terms with a cybersecurity startup I'd just agreed to fund, and I didn't even check the article until Ava, my chief of ops, texted, "It's fire, you sound like a legend." I opened it between meetings, skimmed the headline, "The quiet architect behind a multi-million-dollar rise," and paused only at the line that read, "Once underestimated, now indispensable." That one hit. Not because it was flashy, but because it was true. For years, I had been the fallback plan, the safety net, the woman who paid the bills while he figured things out. And now, I was the woman who figured everything out and didn't need anyone's credit to make it real. That night, I came home, kicked off my heels, and found a message waiting in my inbox. It was from him. The subject line was, blank. The body. "Congrats, you always were better at this." I stared at it for exactly 10 seconds before deleting it, without replying, because by now I had learned the difference between validation and bait, and I wasn't taking any. That weekend, I hosted a dinner at my place. Just 6 people, all founders, all brilliant, all carrying stories that never made it into the pitch deck. One woman shared how her husband left her the week she launched. Another said her family still believed she was working in HR because they wouldn't understand what she'd built. We raised our glasses not to revenge, but to resilience. Not to followers, but to freedom. After everyone left, I stood by the window, watching the city exhale, and I thought about all the ways I used to twist myself small to keep a man from feeling insecure. I used to tone down my voice, my ideas, my ambition. I used to apologize for being tired, for being focused, for having more in my savings account than he did. Not anymore. Now, I hire without hesitation. I lead without shrinking. I build without shame. The next morning, I got a call from a friend in our old neighborhood. He moved out, she said. Said he's thinking of relocating. Word is, he's broke. I didn't gloat. I just nodded. Sometimes, I said, the loudest collapse is the one no one hears. I hung up, walked into my office, and pinned a sticky note to my whiteboard. It said, not your lesson to teach, just your life to live. Because that's what healing looked like now. Not proving, not explaining, just continuing. He thought I was done when he threw me out. But the truth was, I was just getting started, and every door that closed behind me had only made the next one easier to open. With no keys. Just fire. Just focus. Just the quiet power of a woman who never needed to announce her arrival, because her results did it for her. 2 months later, I was invited to speak at a global Women in Tech summit in Berlin, and as I stepped off the stage to a standing ovation, I realized I no longer thought about the man who left me on a sidewalk with nothing but a duffel bag and a phone, full of silence. I thought about the woman who rose from it. Strategic, grounded, unshakable. After my talk, a young developer approached me, eyes wide, notebook trembling in her hand. How did you keep going? She asked. I smiled. Because I stopped waiting for someone to rescue me. I became the rescue. On the flight back to New York, I reviewed the latest projections for my venture fund, now entering its 3rd round with 2 unicorns in the portfolio and over 100 active LPs. My name had become a door opener, my track record a shield, and my silence a signature. The fortune he never saw wasn't just hidden, it was protected. Because I knew that when you're building something that powerful, discretion isn't just strategy, it's armor. Back home, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address. Familiar handwriting. From him. I didn't open it. I dropped it straight into the shredder. Because I wasn't looking for closure from someone who never understood what they were closing the door on. That night, Ava and I celebrated hitting $50 million, 0 cents, in total funding deployed. We drank champagne on my balcony, the skyline lit like a promise. Remember when you said you weren't sure what would come next? She asked. I laughed. Turns out, it was everything. She nodded, and none of it needed him. I raised my glass. To being underestimated. She raised hers. And making that the biggest mistake they ever made. The next week, we launched an accelerator program for single mothers, building startups from scratch. No pedigree, no privilege, just potential. The applications poured in. Stories like mine, stories like hers. I reviewed them at night, moved by the fire beneath every line. One woman wrote, "They said I had nothing, but I had an idea. And sometimes, that's everything." I whispered, "Yes, it is." Because that's what I'd learned. My real wealth wasn't just in accounts or assets, it was in the refusal to give up, the clarity to walk away, the grace to keep building without bitterness. He kicked me out thinking I'd begged to stay. But what he really did was open the gate. And the version of me that stepped through it never needed to look back. She had already arrived. The morning I saw my name on the Inc. 100 list, I was eating toast in a hoodie, hair tied back, reading emails in a sunlit kitchen that overlooked the city I used to cry in, and I didn't scream or post or even pause. I just smiled like someone who'd known this was coming the whole time. Not because it was inevitable, but because it was earned. Quietly. Sharply. Alone. A few hours later, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail like I always do when I don't owe the caller a piece of my peace. When I finally listened to it, his voice came through, familiar, low, suddenly careful. "I saw the article," he said. "I didn't realize everything you did, what you built." He paused as if waiting for forgiveness to crawl through the speaker. "I shouldn't have let you go." That part almost made me laugh, because the truth was, he never had me. He had my convenience, my generosity, my belief that love meant staying even when you were being diminished. But he never had me. Not the woman I was becoming, not the power I was learning to wield. That evening, I sat in my home office drafting a keynote for an upcoming Global Innovation Summit. The theme? Undervalued to Unstoppable. I stared at the title and realized it was more than a speech. It was a record, a receipt, a declaration. Because for every time I was told to be grateful, to tone it down, to stop making waves, I had written back in revenue, impact, and legacy. He wasn't just wrong, he was irrelevant. The next day, I called my lawyer and officially finalized a new asset trust, one designed to fund underrepresented founders who had been overlooked, underpaid, or underestimated. We named it the Vault, not for secrecy, for strength. Because everything they couldn't see in us, we banked. And now we were investing. That weekend, Ava and I hosted a brunch for our cohort. One of the women, brilliant, shy, ruthless in the best way, hugged me and whispered, "I didn't think I belonged in a room like this." I pulled her back and said, "You are the room." That night, as I lay in bed scrolling through launch updates, milestones, and thank you notes from women I'd never met but somehow already knew, I felt something I hadn't felt the night I was kicked out. Not revenge, not triumph, just arrival. Like I had become the version of myself I always suspected was possible if I stopped waiting to be chosen. And here she was, choosing, leading, building. He thought I was hiding a fortune, but what he never realized was, I was the fortune. And now, everyone else was finally starting to see it too. 1 month later, I found myself backstage at the Global Innovation Summit, standing behind a curtain that separated me from hundreds of faces, investors, creators, founders, and visionaries, none of whom knew the version of me that once cried in stairwells, afraid I'd never be enough, afraid that all my effort would still leave me behind. They didn't see the girl who once edited resumes in the dark because her boyfriend told her she wasn't a real entrepreneur. They saw the woman whose name now carried weight, whose work spoke in headlines, whose story refused to be erased. I stood there in heels that felt less like fashion and more like armor, mic clipped to my collarbone, hands calm, because I no longer had anything to prove. I had already proven it. When the curtain pulled back and I stepped onto that stage, the lights didn't blind me, they anchored me. I looked out at the crowd, took one breath, and began with a sentence that didn't need build-up, didn't need context. He thought I'd crumble when he left, but I didn't fall apart. I multiplied. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was reverent. 100 people holding their breath because they'd been there too, discarded, minimized, called too much or not enough. And then I told them everything. Not the sanitized version, not the glossy post-mortem, but the truth. I told them how I was kicked out for losing a job I didn't even need. How the man who told me to pack my things had no clue I was already sitting on a multi-million-dollar foundation, stacked not just in money but in strategy, in patience, in everything he had underestimated, because he couldn't measure it. And I told them how the fortune I had been hiding wasn't in a bank account. It was in my ability to outlast, outwork, and outgrow every room that once tried to shrink me. After the talk, the line to speak with me wrapped around the venue. Young founders with eyes full of fire, women with shaking hands, and soft voices who said, "You made me believe again." Even men, usually confident, told me they'd learned more from my story than from years of panels and panels filled with buzzwords. And I saw it then. Not just the impact, but the ripple. My empire wasn't just built in capital, it was built in echo, in the way my story filled gaps they didn't know could close. That night, Ava and I walked through Central Park, the trees shedding gold around us, the city quiet in that fall kind of way that feels cinematic. She nudged me and said, "You realize you're not even in your final form yet?" I grinned, heart light, shoulders free. "That's the plan." We paused near a musician playing a slow acoustic version of a song I used to loop back when I felt invisible. when I wasn't sure any of it would matter, and for a moment I stood still and let the music catch up to who I had become. I was the evidence that all the unseen hours, the solo wins, the silent pain, it all led here. And now, the fortune I once had to protect from small minds and loud mouths was unshakably loud, beautifully public, and entirely mine, back at home. In a space I'd bought with zero help and zero apologies, I lit a candle, opened my laptop, and started sketching the framework for my next venture. Not because I needed more accolades, not because I wanted validation, but because the fire hadn't gone out. It never did. Building wasn't a phase. It was my nature. And now, I wasn't building in the shadows anymore. I was building with thunder. Because silence may have been my beginning, but volume would be my legacy. That night, before bed, I checked my phone and saw a new message from him. No greeting. Just a sentence. I still think about what happened. I wish I'd done it differently. I didn't delete it. I didn't reply. I archived it. Because that's where he belonged now. Not rewritten into my success, not edited into my story, but filed away like a document you don't need anymore. Not because it never mattered, but because it's done. Because my life had moved on. Because my work had become thunder. And I was no longer the woman hoping to be chosen. I was the storm he could never contain. The morning my foundation crossed its first $1 million milestone in deployed grants, I brewed coffee in the same kitchen he once stood in, calling me just a consultant with a few gigs, the kind of condescension that used to sting, but now only reminded me how small his vision had always been. That kitchen, 25 stories above the city with sun flooding in through glass walls and every countertop gleaming, looked nothing like the old one we shared, cluttered with his excuses and my overcompensating effort. This one held only my name, my work, my peace. I opened my inbox to founder updates. Apps that were scaling fast, local communities that were hiring again, and small businesses that had been days from shutting down, now reporting record growth. One message simply read, "You gave me proof that power doesn't have to be loud, it just has to be real." I read it twice, closed the laptop, and stood still in that silence for a moment. Not overwhelmed, not emotional, just anchored. Because for the first time, I understood what it meant to stop chasing milestones and instead walk from them. Rooted, grounded, unstoppable. Every win now wasn't about escaping the past, and it was about building a present so strong the past had no place left to live. That afternoon, I met with a journalist from a major business outlet doing a follow-up on my recent Forbes profile. She was warm, sharp, curious. Midway through the interview, she leaned forward and asked, "If you had one message for women who've been discarded, dismissed, or told they don't belong, what would it be?" I didn't flinch. "Let them go," I said, "and then build the life that makes them irrelevant." Her eyes widened like I'd said something revolutionary. But to me, it wasn't a line. It was a blueprint. Because every time someone had underestimated me, every time someone had minimized my ambition or mocked the size of my dreams, I'd quietly turned their doubt into leverage. Later that day, as I walked through my neighborhood, the same streets where I once handed out resumes and got ghosted by people with half my work ethic, I passed a storefront I'd quietly funded for a first-time founder who was told she was too inexperienced to be taken seriously. She wasn't. She was brilliant. I stepped inside, complimented her progress, and handed her a small note that said, "They don't see you yet. That's your advantage." Because it was mine. Obscurity hadn't been punishment. It had been cover. A place to rise. A place to build where no one thought to look. That night, curled up on the couch with my notebook and a glass of wine, I opened to a clean page and wrote a truth that had been humming in my chest for months. He kicked me out, so I left. He mocked me for losing a job, but I walked away holding a future he couldn't fathom. Then, beneath it, I added, he was the end of something small. I became the beginning of something unstoppable. And if you've ever been the one who was told to wait your turn, to lower your standards, to be grateful for crumbs, this is your reminder. You don't have to go back to the table that tried to starve you. You can build your own. You can feed others. You can turn every closed door into the reason you created your own hallway. Because you don't need revenge to rise. You don't need recognition to build. You just need one unshakable truth. that everything they overlooked became everything you needed. So if this story found you at the right moment, drop a comment. Tell me what you've built in silence, what you've reclaimed without asking. Like, comment, subscribe. Because this isn't just about being kicked out, it's about making sure no one ever has the power to throw you out again.